Dublin's streets are steeped in stories. From Joyce to Wilde, you can still feel that literary spirit as you walk through Dublin. So today, let's take a bit of a literary tour in the capital city. Hi, welcome back to the Traveling in Ireland podcast. Today we are visiting Dublin. Now, Dublin has always been a city of words. Think of names like Joyce and Yeats, Beckett and Wilde, and their stories are still echoing through the streets today. In fact, it's one of the things that makes Dublin so much fun to explore, because everywhere you go, you are walking through layers of literary history. Before we go much further, I want to give you a quick reminder. If you visit a place that you hear about on the show, be sure to let them know. It helps me to bring more great guests on to share even more Ireland attractions and tips. So don't forget to be a name dropper and say, I heard about you on the Traveling in Ireland podcast. Now, my guest today is no stranger to the podcast. He was actually on in his last role with the Jeannie Johnson. But today, David Cleary is the CEO and director of the Museum of Literature of Ireland, affectionately known as MoLI, where Ireland's literary past and present come together in one really amazing space. So, David, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Now, Dublin is often called a city of words. And as I kind of reeled off a few writers at the beginning, but so many world-renowned writers have called the city home. So how do you think the city and Ireland overall have shaped the works that we know so well today?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a very open question because I'm very complimentary, obviously, towards Irish people and our writers. I think a lot of it has to do, I suppose, with the idea that Dublin being like the heartbeat of a lot of these writers' lives, whether they were born and raised in Dublin or whether they were born outside of Dublin itself and came to Dublin. It's often been the focus of a writer's life through many, many generations, because this is a lot of the time it's where maybe the work was, or maybe the money was for these writers. Publishing houses, these sorts of things, a lot of it was centered in Dublin. So Dublin naturally plays a huge role in these writers' lives, and that's echoed in the work. We kind of always said that, Ireland, it is steeped in mysticism and stories, and the writers definitely capture that. Some of the best writers, I mean, you mentioned Joyce and Beckett and Yeats and Wilde. They're some of the very, very, very well-known writers and celebrated writers all around the world. But the thing that Dublin and Ireland has is it has writers everywhere. As a visitor to the city, as you mentioned, you get to see poetry displayed on walls. You get to see the celebration of statues of writers, of our artists. And you don't always get to see that in lots of other cities around the world. You might see politicians being celebrated or different things like that. Whereas in Dublin, it's very much the writers and that sort of literary side that is brought to the fore. But I think why it's kind of why Dublin, Ireland has shaped their work is because it's quite a unique place. As you'll know well, and maybe some of your listeners who maybe have visited Ireland already, and hopefully we get to welcome a lot more people to come. Ireland is a very different type of place. We've a lot of strange history that we like to celebrate and share. But one of the things that makes Ireland a little bit different is the people. And, that's often sometimes one of the things that people say when they visit Ireland for the first time, or what they remember from having visited. The people are so unique. They're so genuine. They're talkative. They will ask you questions and point you in the right directions. And I think the writers capture a lot of that in their work. The literature, whether it's through fiction and the novels or poetry or playwrights, they capture the people. They capture the essence of what Irish people are, the wisdom, the quirks. And sometimes that is why it's so celebrated all around the world, why Irish literature is known, is because they capture something that is quite unique, which is Irish people's nature. And sometimes, unless you meet an Irish person overseas or you get to come over here, people are kind of quite surprised by that and how open we are and how we don't take things too seriously. So there's a certain lightness of touch to those interactions. And, literature just being the art form of delivering a lot of that and delivering a lot of the content. Humor is at the essence of everything we do, but within humor, it's intertwined with tragedy and the sad stories as well. And it's just a unique way of trying to capture that has made our writers so well known all over the world. And it just so happens to be framed by the villages, the towns, the cities that we live in and the people get to come and visit. So we're very descriptive of the people, but also very descriptive of the situations and the places that people find themselves in. So it can be seen when people got to come here as well. So, when people are very descriptive about a place, they can come and see it as well, which is fantastic.
Well, and I think Irish literature also has a lyricism to it. It has a different cadence and a flow that you may not find in other writing. And I've been told, I have some friends who are published authors from Ireland, and they all kind of give me a different reasoning for that. But I think a lot of it comes down to you think in Irish and you write in English. I've heard that a lot. The flow of the Irish words as opposed to the flow of the English words creates a different cadence to how things are written. Would you say that's correct?
Absolutely, yeah. We are distinctly Irish in how we describe things. Maybe it's not exactly that way now for a lot of our writers in that they're thinking in Irish and writing in English, but definitely through the generations for hundreds of years, it was that fact. A lot of the people involved as writers through the generations would have been fluent in Gaelic, the Irish language. So they would have thought like that. They would have thought in their native voice. They would have bred creativity and subversion. We kind of always say that Joyce, he reshaped English into something very, very distinctly Irish. A very different way of explaining things. As you rightly say, the cadence, it is the ebbs and flows of Irish language translated to English, which does make it stand out. We're taking sometimes literal translations of how we would describe something in Irish, and when it's translated to English, it can be more romantic or can be more humorous, and it's more descriptive, I suppose. So definitely the language plays a huge part in what makes it different as well.
So Dublin is a UNESCO City of Literature. And believe it or not, in my home state of Iowa, Iowa City is also a UNESCO City of Literature, which I found the parallels fascinating. But what do you think that recognition means in practice for visitors and even locals there in Dublin?
It's a lovely thing to be a city of literature, and I suppose whether it's Iowa or any of the other, I think it's 50-something cities around the world that have that unique distinction or that celebrated distinction. What makes Dublin a little bit different, I suppose, is that we try to keep literature part of our everyday lives. It's part of civic life for sure. You can kind of see it everywhere, as we mentioned earlier on, as you walk through the cities. Poetry is a celebration of the location of some of the famous sites that are featured in these works of art are celebrated. They're very much in your eye line, in your face. There's I suppose a strong ethos that through the cultural institutions, whether it's MoLI as a museum of literature, whether it's our national library, our local libraries, the Irish Writers Centre, Poetry Ireland, Children Books Ireland, there's a huge amount of organisations and institutions that are dedicated to literature and dedicated to celebrating it and shining a light on literature, not just for the visitors that come from overseas, it's for the people that live in the city as well. It needs to be part of the fabric of everyday life. And the idea that literature belongs to everyone. It really isn't ever designed to be a kind of a highbrow thing. It's the wit and the wisdom of the pub cultures that are captured in a lot of works, and people see themselves in literature, which is really important. So they can take that and go and share it and celebrate it. We have a lot of unique celebrations throughout the year which are hinged on literature, whether it's the International Literature Festival, we do culture nights, we do book festivals in Dublin and in Dalkey. We have the Bloomsday celebrations, obviously, which are so richly woven into life in June for Dublin. But everywhere you walk around the city, whether it's a bus shelter or a Lewis, one of our trams, you can see literature being brought to life. The words are celebrated. The statues, as I mentioned earlier on, are celebrated. We do a lovely thing in the city where there's a talking statues app where, you can go around to a lot of the statues which are of writers and poets, and their stories are brought to life, But I think for visitors, people particularly who are first-time visitors to Ireland and to Dublin, they see it everywhere. It represented in our museum, the Museum of Literature. They can go to the Book of Kells and Trinity College and see the stories and the literature celebrated everywhere. It's just a lovely thing to stroll through the city and to see this celebrated. So to have a title of UNESCO City of Literature, it really feels right in a place like Dublin, I think.
Definitely very fitting. You mentioned Bloomsday. So for those who aren't aware, June 16th is celebrated as Bloomsday, and it is kind of the living embodiment of Ulysses, right? It's the day you follow Bloom through his day. Now, Ulysses itself is a tome. There's no other way to put it. It is a large and intricate book. But if you could recommend one piece of Irish writing, classic or contemporary, for a first-time visitor to pick up before their trip, don't recommend Ulysses. They're not going to get through it. But what would it be? What would you say, pick up this book and you're going to get a great feel of the Irish experience?
It's a wonderful question, Jody. It's one of those ones where you have hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of books to choose from. That's the lovely thing about Irish literature. There's so much choice. There's so much variance in what people like. It's almost an impossible question to describe Irish literature in one book or even a series of books. And often Ulysses is put up there as the greatest, not only the greatest Irish book ever written, but the greatest novel, the greatest book ever written. And hopefully the museum, we can help share that story as to why that is. But I suppose it would be lovely to have a way into understanding the genius of someone like Joyce or one of our great writers, but not be put off by the idea of Ulysses being quite a difficult book to get into. But one that I would recommend is Dubliners by James Joyce. It's a collection of short stories. It's one of his most accessible books compared to something like Ulysses, of course. It captures Dublin life, a real nice slice of Dublin life, from, working class frustrations to moments of revelations or epiphanies, as Joyce calls them. Even though it's from nearly a century ago, it captures the texture of the city. What we chatted about earlier on, the voices of the people, the streets, the rhythms, that cadence that you mentioned. It's all there in Dubliners, and it still feels present. It still feels like you can walk through the city and recognize some of the places from the stories. It's very, very local. It's quite human in terms of it's great for a visitor to understand the soul of a place and to understand, rather than just seeing something, to understand the layers within that. So Dubliners is definitely one that I think is fantastic for a first-time visitor to Irish literature, but also to maybe the city who are planning to come here, because they'll get to see it brought to life. But we have, as we kind of explain in our museum, Irish literature isn't just books from 100 years ago. There are pieces of incredible books and incredible art that has been written to this day. So there's some lovely books by a guy called Donal Ryan. He's won some awards recently, The Spinning Heart, and they're about more modern times in Ireland. Get a bit of a feel for what life is like now in Ireland, and the culture and the stories and the people. So it just depends sometimes on what people are interested in, because you have it all, I suppose.
I think Dubliners is a terrific start if you are kind of delving into those Irish writers that are so renowned. I think Dubliners is a great recommendation for that. We've mentioned MoLI a few times, so let's kind of shift over to this, because with such a rich heritage, it seems natural that Dublin would have a museum dedicated to literature. So for someone who has never visited, how would you describe the Museum of Literature Ireland, or MoLI?
Yeah, I suppose you say it's kind of, it makes sense for a city to have a museum of literature. The museum actually only opened in 2019, so quite bad timing just before COVID. The museum opened, so it's taken a couple of years, I suppose, for it to get up on its feet again after COVID, and to spread the word and to get people to realize, why they should maybe come and visit. If any of the things that we've talked about over the last few minutes is of interest to people, or it sparks something in people, then our museum is the place for them to explore more. And even trying to explain Irish literature, even to give an idea of why Ireland and Dublin is so special for writers and what it makes it so special, we try to encapsulate that into the museum as well. We try to give a sense of the story of what literature is and why Irish literature is different from English literature and Shakespeare's, Dickens, or why it's different from American literature. It is the people, it's the place, it's the cadence, it is all these things. So we try to celebrate these things. We try to look at the writers themselves as people, not just through the work of the finished book. We try to look at where they've come from and how their stories would have shaped their ideas. We would have liked to look at how they got their ideas from and how they used it to kind of create these amazing pieces of work. We try to challenge people when they're here. We try to get them to think creatively. We try to get them to listen to language and listen to the stories of Irish writers in both Irish and English. And we also celebrate that Irish writers have gone all over the world and written in other languages as well, or their works have been translated into other languages, which helps spread the message of Irish literature and these writers. So it's all here, just trying to kind of bring to life that story of Irish literature is quite a complex thing, but it should be quite accessible. It shouldn't all just be about people thinking it's about Ulysses and that's a difficult book, I don't understand. Irish literature is a short poem. It's a comedy. It's a play. It's people have been exposed to Irish literature in some way, shape, or form. They may not just not realize it. So at the museum, we're trying to bring people in and trying to engage them, to inform them, to educate them, to inspire them. And maybe we have in one of our rooms towards the end of the museum, maybe they'll write a book themselves. Maybe they'll have an idea about if the greats can do it and how did they do it and how did they start. If you can put a couple of words down on a page and just keep writing, you have a book eventually. It's a lovely idea that there is creativity in all of us. There's a story in all of us. And that literature is the art form of storytelling. We do it every day. All of us, we send WhatsApps and iMessages and FaceTime to people, and we talk and we share stories, and literature is just the art form of that, of connecting with other people. So it's such a lovely way for us as a museum to be able to try and bring that to life and to get people just to think in a little bit of a different way, I suppose.
So I visited MoLI, it must have been just days after it opened in January of 2019. And I think I was most surprised by, like you said, it's not just the greats. It was just, there was so many different writers that were kind of highlighted. There was a display on a children's writer at the time. There were poets, there were novelists, there were short stories. There was just so very much different options. I don't know, just so many different writers of different types of things. It was a very vast selection, I guess, is probably the best way for me to say it. So I know that you rotate exhibits and experiences. So what kinds of things tend to surprise people most when they come in and they're maybe just expecting a museum about such well-known writers? What do you think really tends to catch people's attention?
I think one of the things that surprises people most is the vastness of it, which is kind of what you're just getting at there. You know, there are so many Irish writers. There are so many different genres of Irish literature, different ways of bringing the message to life. A lot of maybe what surprises people is that they don't realize for such a small island, nowadays predominantly English speaking, but English is a second language, how vast the influence these Irish writers have had all over the world. Anyone around the world, whether they're English speaking or not, non-English speaking, would have heard perhaps of W.B. Yeats or Oscar Wilde or Joyce or Beckett or Seamus Heaney. And for a small island with a relatively small population, the question always is why? Why have Irish writers been so celebrated? But it isn't just those people. As you say, you know, people are surprised when they come in and we try to tell them the story about these greats. We're also leading into the other Irish writers that have had huge impact and huge influence all over the world that people maybe didn't even realize were Irish, you know. But I suppose one of our challenges always, and that's in the surprising sense, is that while we share the stories and share some amazing artifacts from James Joyce, for example, we have copy number 1 of Ulysses. So we mentioned Ulysses, we kind of put Ulysses up on this pedestal all the time of being a great. We will explain to people why it is so celebrated and why it is so great. But to have the actual first copy on show, it's kind of like going to see the Book of Kells or the Crown Jewel. Definitely for anyone interested in literature, it is the very, very first printed book. So it's a real wow moment. You know, it's a real special experience to see that. But it's not just, as I mentioned earlier on, it's not just about the finished book. You know, a lot of other museums would show the finished thing. What we go into, we actually tell a story of Joyce's, how it came about in terms of where he drew his inspiration, how he prepared to write the book. We see his notebooks and how he prepared to weave the stories together. Why is Ulysses renowned as quite a difficult book? Because the weaving, when you see it in his notes, you can see how his brain is working. He used crayons to kind of weave the stories together. He used different colors to kind of tell a story in his preparation before he's writing it. And a lot of other writers, modern writers, use the creative work, the creative ways of bringing stories to life. And we want to kind of bring that to life. So it surprises people that they're not just coming to a museum to look at a load of names and dates and books. They get to see the process. They get to join in the process. They get to write a first page themselves, or if they want to come and hear from writers, we do a lot of workshops and experiences at various times throughout the year. The temporary exhibitions then are kind of focused on specific themes. So we have a romantic fiction workshop at the moment called Happy Ever After, which is looking at the often derided romantic fiction genre. That it's kind of almost so it's a guilty pleasure. We shouldn't quite be reading these types of books. It shouldn't be. Reading is the most incredible thing. Whether you're a 5 and a 6-year-old learning to read independently or learning with your parents or guardians, reading is an incredible thing of sharing stories. It doesn't matter whether there's a romantic theme to it. It's about, that's what you enjoy, go for it. I think people are surprised.
It's an escape, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Reading's an escape for you, and you're not going to escape into something you don't enjoy. So finding that thing you enjoy. for that escape, right?
Yes. And that's, I think, what we kind of like to say to people. Maybe what surprises them, they think they're coming to see one thing, whereas actually it's showing that literature and stories and reading, it's very, very accessible. They probably just don't realize how accessible and how open it can be to people, you know?
I think that the thing, going back to Ulysses, is that seeing the thought process, right? Because for a lot of us who maybe thought I could be a writer, and then you went, I don't even know what I'm doing. I can't make a story. But to see the thought process and have it laid out in that way, it really does bring to you that it's more than words on a paper. There is an entire process behind it that piecing it together, laying it out, just visually seeing it, I think draws you in almost as much as the story. Knowing how it was put together almost makes it more interesting, I think.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It kind of puts a human element to these people as well, that they aren't just some mythical figure and you just see the finished work. You get to see how their brain might have worked and how difficult when you see whole pages, entire pages crossed out. It wasn't easy for them. And someone like Joyce, for example, people think of him obviously as a very, very celebrated and prolific writer. But, you know, when you look at the actual body of work over the years, over his lifespan, you talk about a handful of finished books in reality. You know, he did write a lot in different articles and magazines and things and papers and journals. But like people think it's kind of like maybe like a Netflix show where there's 20 different bits to it, and it's much rarer for some of these works from these writers. So yeah, definitely getting the human element and the human side to these writers is quite different.
It really is. So MoLI is located in Newman House, and that is a historic Dublin building, has its own history. So when they were looking at creating MoLI, did the house play, the location and the building itself, did that play into what they wanted to do? Was there a reason that was chosen? Or, was it just it's available and we fit?
No, I suppose there's a number of things. It definitely fits, but it fits for a reason. So Newman House is named after John Henry Newman, celebrated now a saint. He started the Catholic University here in Dublin and in Ireland. You know, quite liberal thinking, I suppose, for the time and arts orientated. But the buildings itself, there's three buildings together here it's quite in the centre of Dublin, just on St. Stephen's Green. And a lot of listeners who have visited Dublin will know that Stephen's Green is often the focal point for a lot of happenings in Dublin. It's a beautiful park at the top of Grafton Street where there's a lot of cultural institutions and shops and pubs and restaurants. So we're right on Stephen's Green, right in the centre as you look from north to south. And Newman House is, as I mentioned, it was the startings of the Catholic University, but before that it was actually private houses together. There's two private houses, number 85 and number 86 in Stephen's Green, and they're nearly 300 years old. The original house is from the 1730s, so there's a huge amount of history within the building. And we kind of say, you know, our museum, it isn't just about stories, it's actually inside one. There's a huge amount of stories and history that we like to celebrate about these buildings. But a lot of it is quite relevant to Newman because the startings of his idea about starting a Catholic university that then transferred over to becoming the University of College Dublin, which is its home now, the largest university in Ireland and biggest in Europe, is that, you know, the idea of creativity, the idea of coming up with stories and coming up with sharing these stories with people, it's very much of a place. So to have a museum of literature in a location where, I mean, we mentioned Joyce, that's why we focus on Joyce. James Joyce actually studied in these buildings. So he would have had his classes in some locations where people are walking through reading about James Joyce. They're seeing the same floorboards that he walked on, the same mantelpieces that he stood at. And in some cases, in some of his work, some of the places that he wrote about, going right back to our chat at the start, you get to see the places that these writers are writing about. You get to feel it. It was very much a natural location to have a museum of literature because one of the most celebrated writers would have studied here. But he's not the only one. Like we have Maeve Binchy and Flann O'Brien and some incredible writers who have studied in these buildings. When the university moved out to need a little bit more space as it was growing, it moved out to South Dublin, so not a million miles away from here. But it left a huge opportunity for the buildings to be used and to be celebrated and to be opened up to people to come in and to help share the story of the history of the building, you know? So the stories within are amazing for us to be able to share. The architecture is jaw-dropping, and I think sometimes I'm very lucky to come into this building every day and work here, and you don't want to become immune to what you're seeing. You know, the history that has gone before you as you walk into the building. A lot of people coming to Dublin will be maybe familiar or would like to see the Georgian buildings and the Georgian doorways and things like that. And they're absolutely incredible examples all around the city. But to be able to go into a building like this, a building that is nearly 300 years old, and to touch and to feel your way around these buildings and to look up and to see this amazing stucco architecture and stucco plasterwork, it's really, really special. So it's trying to bring to life a sense of place, what has happened and what has gone before. But also just buildings are now playing a part in telling a story of a different kind, which is all about our literature and our writers. And we're actually quite lucky. I mean, I mentioned earlier we're located right on Stephen's Green, but the buildings themselves, whether they were private houses or then university that followed later, they have a gorgeous garden out the back. Our gardens, actually, we have a private entrance into the Ivy Gardens, which are behind the museum here as well. So we kind of have this incredibly peaceful location for people to come and visit. You know, you're right in the center of a very busy city. But when you step out to the back garden, particularly, we call it our reader's garden because we want people to come in, and we do, particularly during the summertime and when it's not raining, we put an outdoor library here. So we want people to take a book and to slow down, to sit for a couple of minutes and read some paragraphs or some lines from an Irish writer. And we very deliberately have the garden designed so that in the reader's garden, you sit on one of the benches and the benches sit back into the hedges. So you're not distracted. You can't see too much either side of you. Your peripheral vision, your focus should be on the words, the stories, and you get to listen to the birds and listen to the trees rustling in the city centre of Dublin. It's quite a different feeling. But it's the idea that just bringing to life these buildings and bringing to life somewhere that's very, very special. And it's quite a hidden gem in the city. You know, as I mentioned earlier on, we're still quite a new museum, but having this garden within another garden, which is a hidden gem in the city, is quite unique. The Ivy Gardens, just a kind of a slight tidbit that we connect to here. A lot of people will be familiar with Stephen's Green, perhaps, and go and visit that, and it's absolutely beautiful with the lake. But the Ivy Gardens, there's not even a lot of Dubliners know that they exist because they're quite hidden by a lot of buildings. And people, I'm sure, are maybe addicted to the House of Guinness on Netflix at the moment and the story of the Guinness family. That's a huge connection to the Guinness family with the Ivy Gardens, and they gifted it to the people of Dublin. So there's lovely connections all over the place. And for people to wander in and to see the waterfall here in the Ivy Gardens and then be able to come directly into our museum, to our garden and our stories about literature, there's a lovely connectivity with it.
The Ivy Gardens, if you're there at the right time, the rose hedge maze is stunning.
It is, yeah. And that's the thing, not people, if they're lucky enough to stumble upon it, are wowed. And that's sometimes, you know, as you're vacationing in a city, the unplanned things are things you maybe remember a little bit more. But what I would say to people is sometimes don't try to be too unplanned. You know, when you get a recommendation, go and explore something like this because it really is wow.
So what should people know if they're planning to add MoLI to their itinerary? Do they need to pre-book? What kinds of things do people need to keep in mind? And then also, where is the best place for more information?
Yeah, I suppose in terms of pre-booking, we always like to know when people are coming because it helps us kind of make the experience that little bit better for them. But they don't need to pre-book. So one of the joys about being on vacation in Dublin is to wake up in a vibrant city and try and work out what to do next. People are often surprised by how accessible and connected the city is, particularly the city centre. Whether you are getting a hop-on, hop-off bus or whether you're walking the city, it is quite walkable. You can get to a lot of places quickly, and there's a lot of, particularly where we are, there's a lot of cultural institutions and museums and places to visit that are quite easy. So often if people kind of book too much in advance, they can kind of leave themselves a little bit skewed as to different times, not realizing how close things are. So we definitely want people to come and visit us, but they don't have to book. And I suppose in terms of visiting the museum, it's designed to be self-guided. And what we say in that sense is that come and be prepared to spend anywhere from an hour to 90 minutes to 2 hours, because it depends what type of experience people want. You know, you can go through and read a lot of the content quite quickly, but we do encourage people to sometimes just sit and to slow down and to try and take in some of the words that are overhead of Irish writers and to listen to the language and maybe grab a coffee in our cafe or in the garden and sit and read a chapter or two of, or try and read a chapter of Ulysses. Challenge yourself, just sometimes to give yourself that little bit of time and space to explore the buildings and the surroundings. In terms of finding out about more about us, I mean, obviously the websites are one of the great things, or any of our social channels. It's moli.ie, so it's MOLI. Museum of Literature Ireland is kind of the acronym from MoLI. Ireland.com is an incredible place just from starting planning your vacation. But we have a lovely radio station as well called Radio MoLI. And there's a lot of lovely content there for people that if they're planning their vacation and they want to get into a bit of a sense or a feeling of Irishness or Irish culture, if they're preparing their dinner or they're going for a walk or in their gym, go onto our website and click on the Radio MoLI link. They get to listen to Irish writers and get to listen to some lovely podcasts about Ireland and writing and literature and culture. And it's a lovely way just to broaden your horizons about what Irish literature is. And it can often prepare people a little bit for wanting to learn more about a particular subject, a particular theme, or a particular writer.
Oh, that's terrific. I love that. The audio that you can, take with you is so nice. I love that. Well, David, you have given us so much information and this has been so much fun. So I'm going to ask you for 3 more things. As we mentioned at the very beginning, Dublin's literary past is still very much in evidence. You feel it, like you said, throughout the city. So if people are coming to visit Dublin, where should they add to their itinerary that's going to give them the greatest sense of that literary history? Are there 3 places you would recommend considering adding to an itinerary for that? Not counting MoLI. They're going to go to MoLI. David is going to share a few of his Dublin literary highlights for you in just a minute. But if Dublin is on your plans, part of your itinerary, I want to remind you that my Dublin travel guide is absolutely free and available on the website. Just visit IrelandFamilyVacations.com/explore, EXPLORE, and click Dublin. And you will be able to see the top 5 recommendations I have for County Dublin, places to stay, tours to take, and other handy tips. Again, just visit IrelandFamilyVacations.com/explore and click Dublin.
Well, that makes it a little easier for me to not count MoLI, I suppose, because I can be fair to other places. Yeah, I think as we chatted about earlier, literature and the idea of literature and writers is everywhere in the city. So you kind of don't want to just focus on just visit MoLI. You will get a great sense of it. We definitely want to send people to other locations to see it in action, I mean, one of the most famous places that people would go to is the Long Room in Trinity College, home to the famous Book of Kells, but it is actually visually the most stunning library you're ever likely to see. People will be familiar maybe with the image, but it is absolutely gorgeous. And sometimes people will want to just go and see the Book of Kells, obviously, but go and take the picture in this beautiful location, which is a way of housing all these amazing works and these amazing pieces of literature. So yeah, the Long Room as a library, if people can't get to even the National Library, which is kind of the home of it all, home of the most amazing archives in the country and celebrate some of the fantastic writers. Another location, I suppose, is to maybe go to a pub. We have plenty of them, but a lot of Irish writers would have taken their inspiration from overhearing conversations and watching and seeing the characters in their pubs. And there are some very, very famous pubs in the city. I'm sure you've got some great guests on previously, and you've written some amazing articles as well about where to go in terms of pubs. But one that is often celebrated is Palace Bar in Fleet Street in Temple Bar. It's kind of on the periphery of the traditional Temple Bar pub. It's slightly different in that it has the oak panelling. It has housed a lot of the journalists and the writers and the people that we celebrate in the museum, like Patrick Kavanagh and Brendan Behan and Flann O'Brien and Seamus Heaney. So it's a place that you can go to and almost you feel and hear the history and the stories as you walk in, and maybe sit there with a pint, looking out the window. And then another place, I suppose, is to go and explore the bookshops. There's amazing bookshops in the city. There's incredible independent bookshops. And I think that's one of the things that we try to keep alive, that independent spirit in the city, that it isn't just the chain locations that house them all. There are some amazing independent bookshops, the Winding Stair, Connolly Books, some fantastic places that people go into. And even just while away half an hour, maybe they'll come to our museum and they'll get an idea of, that writer, his quotes seem nice. I'd like to read more about him. We have a bookshop in MoLI. If it's there, fantastic. But if not, go to a bookshop and challenge yourself to pick an Irish writer, talk to the staff in the bookshop and say, I'd like to buy a book of Irish literature or from an Irish writer while I'm in Dublin. And it'll be something that you remember from your vacation to Ireland. Maybe you'll have found a kind of an incredible avenue into a different form of literature that you wouldn't have gotten if you hadn't have visited that museum or that bookshop and wanted to, I suppose, capture something of the best of Ireland and our culture. It's just sometimes done through the words in the pages.
Oh, those are such terrific recommendations, David. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to talk with me today. This is such a fun episode, and it really does go to the heart, I think, of Dublin and Ireland overall. So thank you so much.
Sure, no, a pleasure to join you, Jody. Thank you so much.
Dublin's literary history is something that I am asked about often, so I hope that you found this episode as fun to listen to as I did to record. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you can't leave a review on your podcast app, you can visit Ireland Family Vacations on Facebook and leave a review there. Or you can go to Trustpilot at irelandfamilyvacations.com/trust and just say something nice. It would really mean a lot to me. As always, if you have questions or comments on this episode, you can email me, Jody, Jody, at irelandfamilyvacations.com. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, slán go fóill.